I'd just finished a double call, one of those back-to-back cases where your adrenaline never has a chance to settle. I walked into the station's garage, heart still pounding, hands trying to steady themselves as I pushed through the door. My partner, Steve, was at the desk, tapping away at the keyboard, nothing out of the ordinary. Then the radio crackled. The fire chief's voice came through, cold and flat. "Julia Dalton, step away from active calls effective immediately. You're being suspended for compromising protocol. Effective immediately." I froze. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. Steve glanced at me, clearly confused, but stayed quiet. He didn't even look up from his screen. The fire chief's voice came again, thick with smugness. "You've endangered the department's operational integrity. You'll be barred from responding to any further calls. You'll be given instructions to clear out your equipment by the end of the shift." The static buzzed, but no one else spoke. The entire dispatch line was silent. No questions, no comments, just that awful, suffocating silence. "Effective immediately," the chief repeated. And then nothing. The line went dead. I stood there, staring at the radio, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't even given a chance to explain. A warning? A conversation? No. Just the axe dropped. Steve finally spoke, but it wasn't to me. He was looking down, maybe trying to pretend it wasn't happening. Did he just... "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "I guess I'm done." I didn't want to scream, didn't want to throw something, but the words didn't feel real. I was still wired, still shaking with the last rush of the call I'd just wrapped solo. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. Without saying another word, I turned on my heel and left the garage. I didn't care if they all knew I was pissed. They knew what happened. They'd just dismissed me like I didn't matter. I walked to my apartment in a daze. I had nowhere else to go, no one else to talk to. When I got home, I didn't stop to think. I walked straight to my closet and pulled out the dusty envelope, the one with Redbird V5 scrawled across it. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but now, it felt like a promise I'd never gotten to make good on. The letter came 2 days later, delivered by a courier with a clipboard and a neutral look on his face, like this was just another errand. It felt like a slap, something official, something to make it all stick. I didn't even open it at first. Just stared at the envelope like it was a confession of everything I knew was coming but still couldn't quite believe. I cracked it open, the paper thick and stiff, the kind they use for bad news. I read it twice before I could process the words. Termination notice. A 1-year ban from any EMS work. They'd thrown out every accusation they could. Violation of senior command's orders. Endangering operational protocol. No mention of the 2 lives I saved when the comms line failed. No mention of all the unpaid overtime I'd poured into the job. They didn't care. It was clean and clinical, nothing more than a stamp of authority. No recognition, no apology. Just their version of the truth. I threw the letter on the counter, the weight of it sinking in. I tried to push it aside. Maybe they thought I'd just give up. Maybe they thought it would be easy for me to walk away. I applied for unemployment, thinking maybe that would be the last of it, but they blocked it. Termination for cause, they said. Like that somehow made it all okay. I wasn't allowed to be unemployed for even a minute, not with their official stamp on my record. The next blow came when I tried to log into the rescue database. I couldn't get access. My name had been scrubbed, just wiped clean. I could still see my old credentials, but the moment I tried to open a file, it sent me straight to an error screen. That was when I got the message. It was anonymous, no name, no contact, just a subject line that made my blood freeze. FYI, they're saying you never contributed to Redbird Ops. I stared at it for a long time, rereading the sentence over and over. My hands clenched. They were rewriting history. They were erasing me, pretending I'd never mattered. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type, didn't respond. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I grabbed a legal pad from the desk, the yellow paper comforting in its simplicity. I didn't even think about it. I just wrote 3 words. Make them prove it. It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise. The kind you make when you're done playing by the rules. The kind you make when you know you're right but the world refuses to see it. They had their story. Fine, let them have it. but I was going to make sure the truth came out, no matter how long it took. I didn't know how yet, but that didn't matter. I had time now, time to figure it out, and I wasn't going to back down. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could find: radio logs, patient signatures, supply checklists, the stuff I'd filled out and logged every shift. I had to make sure the history was clear, everything documented in case I needed to prove it. I dug through old field notes, pages of scribbled procedures I'd written up before I even joined the department officially. Some were half-formed ideas. Others were detailed steps for how to streamline operations and make the system better. I knew they'd stolen it all. The Redbird system, the one they'd bragged about implementing after I'd shown them my prototype. Every line of code, every chart, was something I'd created. But no one remembered that now. They were busy erasing my name from everything, pretending I was never part of it. But I wasn't stupid. I had the records. I had everything. I spent hours reconstructing the original Redbird response algorithm. It was the one the department had claimed was their own, but I knew every single line in it. Every tweak they'd made to it came straight from my drafts. They'd just cleaned it up, slapped their name on it, and erased me from the story. It was when I was deep in the weeds of my old work that I thought about the lawyer, the one who used to represent locals in government corruption cases. His name was Frank Thompson, an old guy with a reputation for knowing where the bodies were buried and how to make them stay buried. I didn't call him. I drove out to his office. Frank's place was tucked away in a rundown building in a part of town that had seen better days. The blinds were half open. The place smelled of stale coffee and old leather. He was in his late 50s, gray hair and thick glasses that made him look perpetually annoyed. He didn't greet me when I walked in, just grunted from behind his cluttered desk. "Sit down," he said. "You know what I'm going to tell you, don't you?" I dropped the stack of papers on his desk, some of my old notes and the department's official Redbird documents. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need you to take a look at this. They stole my work. Now they've fired me and erased me from the system. I need to know what I can do." He didn't even glance at the papers, just pushed his glasses up and leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, that sounds like them. I've seen it before. They'll take what they want, bury you, and pretend it was always theirs." He flipped through my notes, his hands slow, deliberate. "You got any non-compete clauses in your contract?" I winced. I knew the answer. I'd signed the usual stuff. No working for another EMS company in the area for a year if I left, or if they fired me. "It's in there," I said, my voice tight. But I didn't think it would matter. I thought this job was going to be different. Frank raised an eyebrow. "It's going to matter if you plan to stay within their reach. But I just looked at your stuff here. If you really created that algorithm, and you can prove it, then we've got some new laws on our side." I frowned. "New laws?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, leaning forward. "The state passed a law last year barring exclusivity contracts for EMS workers. It goes into effect January 1st. If you don't break protocol, if you haven't done anything to intentionally jeopardize public safety, then that non-compete doesn't hold up. You can work anywhere you want after January 1st, and you'll have the legal ground to go after them for stealing your intellectual property." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're telling me I've been locked out of everything for a year, but after January 1st, I can walk away and do whatever I want?" Frank gave me a sharp nod. "Yeah, just don't screw it up. Keep your hands clean until then, and you'll be fine." I sat there, feeling the weight of the information sink in. This wasn't just a shot at redemption. It was a real chance. "All right," I said, standing up. "Thanks, Frank." He gave me a half smile. "Good luck, Julia, and keep your head down until that clock runs out." I left his office feeling like something had shifted. For the first time since all this went down, I felt like I had a plan. I packed a duffel bag that night, just enough to get me through a few days. I wasn't going to stick around any longer than I had to. The small town was suffocating me, and I wasn't about to wait out the clock here. I headed north the next morning, figuring I had some time to get things moving, time to rebuild, time to show them all who really created Redbird. I rented a cabin behind a closed ski lodge on the outskirts of a town that barely existed on most maps. It was quiet, isolated, perfect for the kind of work I needed to do. I had no intention of going back to my old life, not yet, anyway. Miguel and Sarah showed up a few days later. They were former EMT interns from my time at the station, both of them sharp and reliable. They knew the grind, knew how to move quickly, and how to improvise when everything fell apart. I trusted them, and that's exactly what I needed. I laid out my prototype for them, Emberline. The idea was simple but revolutionary. A civilian-first emergency alert platform. No department permissions, no centralized command. Just regular people acting as the first responders. It would crowdsource information and organize it based on citizen input. Real-time, accurate, dynamic. A complete disruption of the top-down systems that had failed me and so many others. This is the future, I said, clicking through the screens, showing them how the system would work in real-world scenarios. No more waiting for dispatch or department approval. It's all about the community. We can save lives before the professionals even arrive. It's efficient, fast, and decentralized. Miguel nodded, leaning forward. You're sure about this? No department backing, no central authority. Absolutely, I said. That's the whole point. No ties to anyone, no rules to break. We build it from the ground up, on our terms. Sarah was quieter, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. I'm in. We start small, right? Exactly, I said. We tested on clean systems. No connections to any existing networks. Just a couple of us to begin with. No names, no one knows who's behind it. Just pure data. The first few weeks were a blur. We started small, just as we planned. Wildfire zones where communications were shot, collapsed barns in remote areas, rogue ATV accidents. They were perfect testing grounds. High risk, low resource, and the kind of places where time mattered more than anything. We'd set up simple alerts, using whatever devices we could get our hands on. The idea was that citizens could report accidents directly, offer real-time location data, and share any vital information. From there, it would sync with a network of trained volunteers who could respond accordingly. No bureaucracy, just people who were there when things went wrong. Word spread quietly. Paramedic forums, CB radio hobby groups, and small-time volunteer networks were the first to pick up on Emberline. At first, it was just a few people testing it out. An EMT here, a firefighter there. But it didn't take long for them to start sharing stories of how it worked in real situations. I got a message from one of the guys up in the wildfires, Miguel said one night, looking up from his screen. He used it to report a downed firefighter and was able to get help faster than the department could respond. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That's exactly what we need. We're not just disrupting the system, we're saving lives in the process. Sarah was sitting across from me, her fingers scrolling through a series of messages. We're getting more traction than I expected. I've been talking to a few people in Idaho, saying they're using it for ATV injuries. Things are running smoother, no delays. I nodded. The feedback was small, but it was real. Emberline wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a living, breathing thing, growing beyond my control. And that was exactly what I wanted. There was no turning back now. We kept Emberline off the radar. No press releases, no social media blitz. Just small tests, word of mouth, and enough real-world success to make sure the platform was stable. Miguel, Sarah, and I pushed weekly builds, refining the response logic, fixing bugs, adding new features. We weren't trying to make a splash. We just needed to make sure it worked. But of course, in a world where nothing stays quiet for long, word eventually got out. The chatter started in the paramedic forums, a tool that could save lives before dispatch even arrived. It sounded too good to be true, and that's exactly why people started talking. One night, I saw a thread pop up on one of the boards. A volunteer firefighter from a small town had posted, asking if anyone knew about some new app that had been popping up in rural response areas. It's all over the CB radios, they wrote. People are saying it's cutting response times in half. The fire chief heard it too. Word gets around in small towns, and the firehouse wasn't an exception. From what I gathered, he dismissed it as amateur junk. But that didn't stop him from starting to check domain names. He knew something was up, and I could see him scrambling in the background. He had to find out who was behind it, but I didn't care. We weren't hiding anything. We were just building a better system, one that didn't rely on the rules they put in place. Sarah sent me a message one night, her words terse but clear. Forest Ranger just DM'd me. I opened it. Whatever this is, it saved a kid's life last week. Just thought you should know. The text was short, but it hit harder than anything I had read in months. We weren't just helping random people anymore. We were changing lives. A forest ranger, someone who'd probably seen more than their share of disasters, was reaching out to acknowledge the work we were doing. I stared at the message for a minute, letting it sink in. Part of me wanted to respond, to thank them, to acknowledge that we were on the right track. But I didn't. Not yet. I didn't need validation from anyone. Instead, I just nodded to myself and set my phone down. "We're getting there," I muttered, mostly to myself. Sarah and Miguel didn't need reassurance, but I said it anyway. They were quiet for a moment, letting the weight of it hang in the air. Then, like always, we went back to work. More code, more tweaks, more lives to save. The fire chief, the forums, the chatter, it didn't matter. We weren't stopping, not now, not ever. It started with a blog post, a long, meticulously researched piece titled "Why the Dalton Protocol Still Works." It was signed off with the pseudonym Ash Fox, a name I didn't recognize. I clicked on it, my heart sinking as I read through the words, each one confirming what I already knew. Someone had figured it out. They knew exactly what had happened. The post went into detail about the flaws in current emergency protocols, pointing out how outdated systems had been preventing effective response times. It then dissected Redbird, tracing its origins directly back to my work. It even included timestamps, notes, and diagrams that I'd drawn years ago, back when I was just another paramedic trying to fix the system from the inside. Every single draft I'd made, every note I'd scribbled in the margins, was there, neatly laid out for anyone who cared to look. The piece made a clear, undeniable connection between my original designs and the Redbird system that the department had stolen from me. The post hit like a bombshell, and I could hear the echo all the way from the firehouse. Panic spread like wildfire, the kind of panic you couldn't hide. It didn't help when two counties that had quietly begun running Emberline on a pilot basis, started reporting back with positive results. No department was in charge, no chain of command, just real-time, efficient response powered by civilians and volunteers. The fire chief's calm, dismissive attitude cracked. His old mantra of amateur junk didn't hold up anymore. The blog post had blown the cover off everything. I could almost hear his teeth grinding as he scrambled behind the scenes to cover his tracks. But I knew he couldn't erase what was already out there. It was too late for that. Meanwhile, my lawyer, Frank, went into full gear. He'd been watching this unfold from the sidelines, but now it was his turn to get dirty. He dropped a thick IP infringement package on my doorstep one afternoon. I opened it, half expecting a stack of legal jargon, but instead, the papers were straightforward. They used your system and never credited you. Frank's notes were clear. They can't steal your work without consequences. You've got the proof. Time to move. That was the first time I allowed myself to feel something close to satisfaction. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, but the real shift came later. One night, Sarah sent me a message with a link to a video. It was from a volunteer firefighter in Idaho, a guy I didn't know. He'd posted a video of himself mid-rescue, using Emberline to coordinate a response. You could hear the urgency in his voice as he spoke directly to the camera, showing how the platform helped them locate the injured parties faster than dispatch ever could. I hit play, watching as the scene unfolded in real time. The system was working, and not just working, changing the game. People were using it to save lives, and they weren't waiting for anyone's permission. The video hit the right circles, CB radio groups, paramedic forums, and within hours, it had gone viral. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a media circus, but it spread quietly, relentlessly, until it found the people who understood its potential, the people who needed it. I stared at the video for a long time after it finished. I could almost hear the fire chief's frustration through the screen. This wasn't just some experimental tool anymore. Emberline was a movement, and there was no stopping it. I put the phone down, taking a deep breath. I had no doubt the department was trying to backpedal, trying to cover up the fact that they'd stolen what they couldn't even understand. But I wasn't done, not even close. I looked at the screen of my laptop, just a simple, clean interface. My work, my design. Emberline wasn't just a tool anymore, it was a force. And now, no one could ignore it. No one could stop it. I typed out a message to Sarah and Miguel. One line. It's time to make our move. The calls started coming in the days after the video went viral. At first, it was just a few companies asking for demos. But then the serious inquiries came. A rugged tech company that specialized in supporting volunteer EMS departments reached out to me directly. They were based in a small, fast-paced office in the Pacific Northwest. And from the moment I spoke with them, I knew they were the right fit. They weren't interested in flashy marketing or big contracts. They just wanted to get things done. We're interested in your platform, the CEO, Mark, told me over the phone. Emberline is exactly what we need. We don't need another overpriced piece of software sitting on a shelf. We need something that works. The deal didn't take long to negotiate. They agreed to back Emberline fully, providing all the back-end support I'd need to scale the system across states, counties, and departments. The deal included royalties for every subscription, plus full control over licensing. I would be able to license the platform to EMS departments, firehouses, and even independent volunteer groups. I'd finally be able to profit from my own work without anyone telling me how or when to use it. The real kicker was the timing, January 2nd. They agreed to officially launch the platform the day after my non-compete expired. I wouldn't have to worry about legal headaches anymore. I could finally build the future I'd been dreaming of for years. In parallel, Frank kept working on the legal front. A few days after the deal was confirmed, he filed a cease and desist against the fire department for their unauthorized use of my original workflow. They had been running it in the background for months, claiming it as their own. The cease and desist was my first move in the fight to make them pay for what they'd stolen. Frank was confident we had a strong case, but I wasn't focused on the drama anymore. I was focused on Emberline, on getting it to market the right way. I wasn't going to let the fire department or anyone else distract me from that. Still, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Word spread quickly back in my hometown. Some of the old crew sided with me, quietly reaching out to offer their support. But there were others who couldn't let go of their loyalty to the system that had always been in place. They saw what I was doing as a betrayal. "You can't just walk away from the department," one of my old colleagues wrote me. "This is your system. You're throwing everything away." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The people who mattered, the ones who understood what I was trying to do, they were the ones I was focusing on. The rest? They could think whatever they wanted. I had bigger things to worry about. I poured everything into the final push, fine-tuning Emberline's features. I worked with Mark's team on scaling the platform, making sure everything would run smoothly when we officially launched. They had connections with volunteer groups in dozens of states, and we were already working on contracts to get Emberline in front of the right people. We started small, but the plan was always to go big. We weren't just aiming for a few departments. We were aiming to change how emergency services worked from the ground up. By the time January 1st came around, I was exhausted, but it didn't matter. This was it. Emberline was going to launch. I knew it was going to make a difference, no matter how much resistance we faced. When the clock struck midnight on the 1st, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had come before and everything that was still ahead. I had no idea what the fire department was planning next or how they'd respond, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. Emberline was going to change the game, whether they liked it or not. The fire chief wasn't done yet. I knew he wouldn't be. His pride wouldn't let him walk away quietly, not after everything that had gone down. Less than a week after Emberline launched, I heard that the fire chief had demanded a full rewrite of all systems that were Julia-era protocols. He wanted to erase every trace of Redbird from the department's infrastructure. He was scrambling, trying to make it seem like his department was in control again, like nothing had changed. But the chaos he caused was obvious from the start. They brought in a replacement engineer, a young guy who probably didn't know the first thing about the intricacies of the system. His first move? He wiped their central call routing system. Just deleted it. No backups. No understanding of the architecture. The whole thing collapsed. Immediately, paramedics started complaining. Calls were getting delayed, routing was off, and response times were skyrocketing. The department couldn't keep up, not with the mess they'd created. It was all falling apart in front of them, and there was nothing they could do to fix it. 2 local departments pulled out of their mutual aid agreements. They couldn't afford to be tied to a system that was unreliable. It was like a domino effect. The more problems piled up, the more they scrambled to hold it all together. But the cracks were too big to patch. While this was unfolding, Frank kept moving forward with the legal side. His office was flooded with deposition requests, all to gather evidence for the case we were building. Former colleagues, the ones who'd seen the process from the inside, started confirming what I already knew. I had built Redbird from scratch. There was no denying it. The system was mine, and I had the documentation to prove it. Then an internal memo leaked. I saw it late one night while I was up working on Emberline's next iteration. It was from one of the fire chief's underlings, a note to the entire department. The first line hit like a punch in the gut. She planned this from the start. I blinked, rereading it. It wasn't just about the system. It was about me. I'd never intended to tear them down. I'd wanted to improve things, but now they were twisting it into some kind of conspiracy. They had no idea how much I had sacrificed to try and make their system better, how many hours I'd put in to make sure things ran smoothly. They were framing it as if I'd been plotting their failure from day one. I could almost hear the chief's voice echoing in my mind. She planned this from the start. But the best part? Nobody on the team stood behind him. The memo continued. She's done. You all better remember that. It was a threat, plain and simple. He was trying to scare them, to remind everyone that if you stood with me, you were an enemy. But it didn't matter, because what I saw next was the real revelation. No one spoke up for him. There were no defenders. No one in that department was going to back the chief when everything was falling apart. They all knew the truth now, and they couldn't pretend otherwise. I was on the road when I got the memo, up in the mountains driving past a small gas station, the kind of place where you could barely pick up a signal. I stopped for a quick refill and read the leak one more time, letting it sink in. The chief was done. He just didn't know it yet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, took a long breath, and just whispered to myself, "Good." I wasn't angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt calm. The wheels had already been set in motion. Emberline was up and running, and the old system was crumbling under its weight. I didn't have to destroy it. It was destroying itself. The chaos he'd caused, it was his own doing. The more he fought to hold on to control, the more he pushed everyone away. And the longer he tried to erase me, the more he made it clear that he was the problem, not me. I pulled out of the gas station, the wind picking up as I drove away. The town, the chief, the old system, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. Emberline had already changed everything. And now there was no going back. The small-town courtroom smelled of stale coffee and old wood, the kind of place where nothing ever changed. But today, everything felt different. The air was thick with tension as I sat in the defendant's chair, my hands folded in front of me. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I'd fought for this moment for too long to back down now. The fire department's lawyer stood up first, his voice slick with arrogance. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of breach of non-compete. Ms. Dalton violated her contract and is now attempting to undermine the fire department's operations with her unauthorized EMS platform." I didn't react. I kept my gaze on the judge, steady and calm. The lawyer kept going. Emberline is nothing more than an illegal, unapproved competitor to a certified EMS system. It's causing confusion, disrupting operations, and stealing business. I could feel the tension shift in the room, but I didn't let it get to me. Frank was already standing, ready to respond. "Your Honor," Frank said, his voice sharp and measured, "we are not here to argue over competition. We're here because the fire department took Ms. Dalton's intellectual property and used it without permission. Not only that, but the new state law, which came into effect on January 1st, makes this case irrelevant." The judge looked up, his expression unreadable, and turned to the fire department's lawyer. "Explain that," he said, clearly not having heard about the legislation. Frank slid a piece of paper across the table toward the judge, who took a moment to read. Then, without looking up, he read aloud, his voice booming in the quiet room. "The new legislation prohibits exclusivity contracts for EMS employees. and nullifies any non-compete clauses in cases where the employee was not in violation of public safety protocols. Furthermore, any claim that a protocol was proprietary must be substantiated with evidence that predates the employee's employment. The room went still. I could feel the fire chief's eyes on me, a smirk on his face. He had been confident, even smug, through this whole process. But that smirk started to fade as the judge turned his gaze back to the fire department's lawyer. "I assume you're familiar with this new law," the judge said, his tone cold now. "Are you prepared to argue that it does not apply here?" The fire department's lawyer opened his mouth, but the words stalled. I could see the realization hit him. He knew this was going nowhere. The judge didn't wait for a response. He looked at me, then at Frank, and said, "I'm inclined to rule in favor of the defense. The department is to cease and desist all use of Miss Dalton's intellectual property, and they are to remove Redbird from their systems immediately." I held my breath, not because I was worried, but because I needed to hear it, needed to make sure it was real. The fire chief didn't speak. His lawyer's face twisted, but there was nothing they could say. The battle was over. The judge slammed his gavel down. The room remained quiet for a moment. Then the sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the air as people started to stand. But I didn't move. I just stared ahead, watching as the fire chief's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by a defeated expression. "We'll be appealing this," he muttered under his breath, mostly to himself. His lawyer gave him a sharp look, muttering something I couldn't catch, but it didn't matter. The case was done. They'd lost. As my lawyer and I gathered our things, I felt eyes on me. My old colleagues were there too. Some of them had shown up for the trial, probably hoping to see me fail, maybe to see me humiliated. But when they looked at me, there was no pity, no sympathy, just silence. They didn't say a word. They didn't move. They just stared. I stood, took one last glance at them, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't need to say anything. The law had spoken for me. The system had tried to break me, but I wasn't broken. I wasn't going to be. As I stepped outside into the cold air, I took a deep breath. It was done. I didn't look back, not once. The town, the department, the chief, none of it mattered anymore. I had what I needed. And now, I was free. The office was small, but it had character. A converted ranger station tucked just off the highway, surrounded by trees that were slowly shedding their autumn leaves. The building smelled like wood and cedar, a mix of old and new, just like the project I was starting. I looked out the window, letting the quiet settle around me. No more sirens, no more endless pressure to conform to a broken system. Just space, just the work. My team was growing fast. We had a mix of frontline medics, coders, and local volunteers, people who believed in the idea of Emberline the way I did. We weren't just fixing the old system. We were building something new, something that could actually work. Within a few months, Emberline started expanding across the state, under new names, on public health contracts. It wasn't just a tool for volunteers anymore. It was becoming integrated into official EMS departments, making the response system faster and more effective. The shift was happening piece by piece, and it wasn't slowing down. The fire department paid their royalties, though it was a quiet transaction. No one talked about it, not even among themselves. They were still trying to salvage their pride, but the truth was undeniable. They were paying for something that was mine, and they had no choice but to keep doing it. I didn't have to think about it anymore. The old town, the department, the chief, none of them had any power over me now. I pulled open the drawer in my desk, fingers brushing over the dusty envelope marked Redbird V5. It had sat there for years, untouched, and it stayed that way. I never opened it. I didn't need to. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Now, every dispatch that used Emberline was funding my future. That wasn't revenge. That was reclaiming what had always been mine. I didn't need to make them pay. They already had. Not just with money, but with every system that had fallen apart because they'd tried to stop me. Now, my work was moving forward, beyond their control. And as the sun set outside, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was building.